Welcome to Beyond Rent, the property management podcast brought to you by Rent Manager. Each episode, we talk with industry experts about market trends and practical strategies for property management professionals. Now, let's get to the conversation and go Beyond Rent.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Beyond Rent. Today we have Johnny Bravo from Rent Butter joining us today to discuss the evolution of resident screening. What was once a simple step in the leasing process is now a core piece of operational infrastructure. Right? So Johnny, welcome to Beyond Rent.
Thanks. I'm super glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you made the trip out all the way from Southern California to see us. Hopefully you bring some of that better weather with you to Cincinnati. But we're really excited to have you here. We've worked with the Rent Butter team for a long time. I've known you for years now. So to have you in studio is a real pleasure.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. So go ahead and introduce yourself for our audience so they know who you are.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a product strategist for Rent Butter. So I lead our background checks and reports. So everything related to how the product works, its delivery to our clients, as well as making sure that's compliant, it's meeting all the rules, regulations, laws, everything associated with screening as it is today and constantly evolving. I've got about 20 years of experience in rental housing. So I started way back when on the operator side. Over the years, I've kind of transitioned more to the vendor side. Obviously, last 8 to 10 years have been spent focused on fraud and identity and then screening as a whole. I actually married a property manager as well. So it's pretty much encompassed my entire life, the rental housing industry.
Well, there's no way you're getting out now.
Yeah.
You're stuck, right?
Not at all.
I mean, people always talk about once you're in kind of the multifamily property management world, you really stick with it for a very long time. Yeah. I talk to people all the time. It was their first job out of college or maybe even prior to college, and they've been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 plus years. It really is a great industry. There's lots to do. And you're a great example of, maybe moving around a little bit and continue to honing your craft and focusing in different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I did the exact thing. I was in college and I started as an administrative assistant essentially for some account executives for an operator for their corporate sales team, and just kind of through the years have gone down this path, which I think I nerd out on this stuff, which is one of the reasons I'm here and we're having this conversation, right? It's turned into a passion more than just a job or a career, right? It's something I'm interested in, something that's obviously needed and important in the industry, and it's just turned out well.
Yeah, and we were talking prior to hitting record about how you've moved from that sales role to more of a product role. And I find that really intriguing because of the lens that you must have when you're talking to customers. Going from, I'm trying to show you the value and consult and help you understand why this product may be a good fit. You're on the other side, right? Almost a seat maybe sometimes you wish you were sitting in the sales role of being able to influence and guide the product to make sure it is a good fit in the future for the customer. So tell me a little bit about that transition, what that's looked like for you.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Yeah, I mean, up until, probably a few years ago, it's always been on sales. So I'm would be on site, be translating the benefits, having those conversations. And in some respects, the sales side will get the feedback even before like customer support, right? If I'm talking to someone new, they're asking, can it do this, can it do that? And we can't, maybe we have to reframe what we do. Like, is that really what you're interested in trying to accomplish, or can it be solved a different way? But now I'm on the other side of the table, and it's really interesting because one, I'm able to translate those conversations at a much more impactful level. I'm able to bring these conversations, the things that they need, the boots on the ground understanding of how the industry is changing, how the technology is changing, how residents or applicants are changing, and be able to bring that back into something that can not only fit the benefits of the organization that is using our screening, but also the applicants that are using it and how it's impacting their lives and them finding homes and things like that. So it's been really intriguing. I'm enjoying it very, very much.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's a great fit, and it's exciting to see you take on this role. And you mentioned change, right? What's happening with technology, things like that. So let's jump in and start talking about tenant screening. We all know that it does continue to change. We see that, we understand that. What I'd like you to talk about a little bit is why, like kind of the why behind the changes, what you're seeing, what you have seen, and what maybe the Rent Butter team is seeing.
Yeah. So, I think there's been somewhat of an evolution. And in that, we've gotten better as an industry in screening of getting more data, getting data faster. We've digitized forms, we've done things like that, but there's a lot of organizations, a lot of systems that haven't necessarily evolved the back end of it, right? We're getting more information, but are we using that information well? And is that information usable? I mean, not more data is not always better data. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I've worked on the PMS side, in the credit bureau side, and now on the tenant screen side. And that has really hit home that more data is not always better data. And there's a lot of systems that still, they're able to scrap is the term, right? They're able to scrap this data, this public record information, and try to hand it off to a housing provider. And that's not all usable data. And that's a compliance risk. That's a regulation risk, fair housing risk, right? So the evolution, because of technology, because of AI, because of whatever buzzword you want to use, has grown the industry, but the maturity of the industry hasn't necessarily kept pace with those changes in every way. Some have, some haven't, right? But it's constantly, we're constantly having to look at how can we use this data? I look at the regulatory landscape that is constantly changing. And it's not that we got worse at screening, and by we, I mean the industry as a whole. It's not that we got worse at screening. It's just that we haven't kept pace with what is needed for screening, right?
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think it's bizarre how we've been talking about data for decades, how important data is, information, knowledge, whatever, however you want to classify it, and how we need to use this data and create actionable data, all of these things. And you said AI, so we have to talk about it, right? That's kind of the rule. But now we're in a world where AI is available. And so we feel as if all of this data should just start making more sense, that that's the key to unlocking everything. And in some ways it is. And we're seeing a lot of improvements because we can take data plus AI. But you had mentioned like scraping data, things like that, that if you're not using good data or data that you are allowed to use, right, it doesn't really matter, right? It all comes back to you have to have the good data to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And, AI, it's such a buzzword to me because AI can mean so many things, right? ChatGPT is an AI. Some people think machine learning and algorithms, that's AI too. Like there's different ways to view it, and what everyone means when it comes to AI can be different. Unfortunately, like that's kind of where it's everywhere. So it means everything, and that's not accurate in any way. AI can help in certain places, but there always should be a human in the loop, at least when it comes to screening, right? And where inconsistency can happen, that's where the threat of using AI can really showcase and really compound. So edge cases, right, which used to be one-offs when it comes to screening, multi-state jurisdictions, CRAs are not allowed to produce certain records just because as a CRA you're not allowed to, and that's different from what a housing provider can use, right? There's different regulations according to the business that's using it or providing it or whatever it may be, and AI still is not the best at those kind of nuances, and that's where you always want to have a human in the loop, and especially where it's situations where, again, any kind of where inconsistency or drift can happen, that's where humans should be involved, where human judgment should be done, because otherwise those inconsistencies compound in ways that create risk for the organization and can potentially hurt the applicant. None of us want that, obviously.
Well, absolutely. And when we talk about screening, there are regulations, there are rules, there are things that you really have to know and understand before you start kind of veering left and right and trying to do things differently. And I will say that's one of the things that makes the screening process so challenging is you're trying to stay within these guardrails while also pushing the limits of what technology can do, what maybe the resident experience we want to create looks like. There's all these things that we want to do, but those guardrails still exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are first and foremost, right? Because because within those guardrails, that's where you start adapting the technology to be faster, to be better, to be more accurate, to be more consistent, right? But it's absolutely important to abide by the rules of the land. I mean, that's where screening is. And while it can be argued whether they're helpful or not, I truly do believe the intent is to be helpful, to protect applicants in a way that makes sense, that makes it fair. And as housing providers, our housing providers want to find the best possible residents. And something I talk about is, or kind of a thought process I have is that risk doesn't necessarily come from bad applicants. It comes from like inconsistent systems, right? When a housing provider is using systems that are policies that aren't being upheld every single time, that creates risk for everyone involved. When a property is following everything to the T, great. But when you have another one where Sue makes a decision because she never is wrong, right? She's been doing it for so long. Or an example that occupancy is low, so they're gonna maybe make a case that they should allow this person in when a similar application otherwise wouldn't have been approved. Like all of that creates drift. All of that creates risk for the organization, for the applicants. And if you don't have set guardrails as an organization, that can go wrong very quickly.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I do think historically there's been a lot of that can happen because lack of systems, but also lack of technology. Now that technology is more in place, I think it's a little bit easier to have those guardrails, follow those guardrails, hold people accountable, maybe see when people are drifting, away from it, because screening impacts more than just leasing these days, right? So tell me like your perspective on that. When I say screening is more than just leasing, what are some of the other areas that you see screening touching and having impact?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really comes down to screening took on a lot more responsibility than it was really built for originally. Used to be informational. Now it's more decision driven. Leasing and screening specifically within the leasing process, it's not just a step. I mean, I consider screening should be a part of infrastructure for every organization, like insurance, like maintenance, because it touches compliance and risk and finance and all the way downstream to adverse action and disputes. And like, there's so many aspects that are driven by the screening outcome that it shouldn't be thought of as just an ad hoc or step in the leasing process. It should be a core part of the business. And there's some organizations that are already starting to recognize that with, leadership positions focused specifically on screening, directors of screening, things like that. All the way up to enterprise level organizations are doing that because I think a lot of folks are starting to understand the importance of screening, of doing it well, of doing it right, doing it consistently, do it defendably or defensively. It's just taken on a whole new aspect in its role in the organization.
And I think that is a great sign for our industry. What I'm hearing is like a maturing of how we manage our businesses, how we view our residents, how we view things not in a silo within our organizations, right? That we understand when I do this over here, it has impact over there. Yeah. Historically, I really just don't think the data was available to us. So what are you seeing that's changing maybe on the data side that's allowing people to even have that viewpoint, that perspective, that concept of letting it connect and impact other areas?
Sure. Well, I mean, when this all goes back to kind of business intelligence for an organization, right? Historically, property management, rental housing has been slow to adopt new tech. And I would say that it was like that up until like COVID, where we all had to go to digital first interactions. And then prop tech absolutely exploded, at least from my perspective. And in that, lots of organizations were adding so much tech that it was becoming bloated. They just had all these different systems in place. And some consolidations happened, some best of breed approaches like what Rent Manager does, right? You're able to provide a full system for an organization, which is great. But there's still a lot of companies that don't have that. So the way that they've tried to translate some of that is using all this data that they're getting, using some kind of business intelligence to really understand what are the downstream impacts that are going on. with screening, right? They can take that in. Okay, when we use these specific criteria as our screening standards, how does that translate into disputes later, or even maintenance requests? I've seen it translate all the way down to that, right? Like organizations are using the data they have to understand how these decisions impact and snowball, whether that's in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah, I know I've heard other people speak about delinquency, evictions, and taking that and kind of rolling it back to the start, right? The leasing process, the screening process, and say, could we have predicted this? Did we see this? Was there something like you had mentioned earlier, some drift or maybe some gray area that people can live within in that decision process that maybe they need to tighten up to fix that issue down the road, because we know that costs these operators thousands of dollars. And any of these things that we just talked about, whether it's maintenance or delinquency, definitely evictions, like, add another zero to that easily in the cost.
Yeah. And the one thing is, you definitely have to be careful about making those adjustments, because we still have to make sure we're applying it to everyone, right? So this is not a change that you maybe want to try to do weekly, for example, right? I mean, whether you want to or not, probably not recommended to do that. But it makes sense to take a hard look at that data and see how your organization operates and what maybe tweaks you can do. But at the same time, because we have this additional data, some of it is very useful to give you a more holistic view of an applicant. Once upon a time, they'd look at an ID and a credit score and credit report, and that was it, right? Now, IDs are no longer sufficient. Fraud has become rampant, again, coming out of COVID. I think that there was a huge shift and escalation in that. But then also, working at a bureau, credit scores were never designed to predict the likelihood of someone paying rent. They were built to understand, can this person pay back debt? And if you look at the human aspect of it, we think of debt different than we think of rent. Like paying a credit card bill versus paying rent psychologically are different mindsets, which is good for us, if we're able to look more at an individual, at their history, their near-term history, which is something that we do. That's great, or not great, but that's things that they had this bad event 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it may be. But it's much more predictive to look at what happened in the near term, last 2 years or so, right? So when you're able to take this information, this relevant information for someone's profile, their behavioral, their financial profile, you can get a much better assessment of them as an individual. And are they who they say they are, and are they going to pay rent reliably? Yeah.
There's been so much added to that screening process. You're talking about the whole idea of affordability and can someone afford this, and looking at their income and things like this, like that are, yes, that people are trying to do that with pay stubs and stuff in the back. But again, fraud and things like that really have made that hard, where now you can actually see into their actual financial health and so forth, and be able to better predict. So even if, like you said, if they have a poor credit score, but maybe their financial health is actually really good, maybe they are a good fit, right? And in the past, they would have been denied, and vice versa. So it is interesting to think about all of the data that's available. And you had mentioned earlier about kind of the explosion of prop tech, and I agree.
Yeah.
I think we were well positioned for that explosion prior to COVID, but obviously COVID really allowed people to take a second look at it and say, well, no, we need these things in place, and start to add more. But as people add technology, it does introduce some struggles of siloed data. And actually, historically, a lot of people ran screening completely separate from all of their other operations, right? So you do the screening, you'd make a decision, and then you turn over to the rest of your operations and say, let's move them in, sign the lease, do all of this. So the data was never, ever connected, where at least now that data can live in an ecosystem where the data can talk to each other through integrations and things like that. So we are well positioned to use the data that is now available to us and create better guardrails and better information than ever before. And I'd imagine that's really a lot of what Rent Butter focuses on these days, is how is that data being used? Or correct me if I'm wrong, I can't imagine you're trying to revolutionize necessarily the elements of the screening. It's more about how you use the data to make better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're trying to understand at its core, are they who they say they are, and can they reliably pay rent? And understanding what data can help us make that determination, or at least, you know, that we can provide, that a housing provider can make that determination, right? That decision should always be with the housing provider. But it's using that data in a way that gives that holistic view of an applicant, right? Who they are as a person, who they're going to be as a renter, because, you know, we're really strong, especially in like workforce housing, where sometimes you're looking at subprime or near prime applicants, and that historically is the largest kind of credit profile of workforce housing, and I want to say of the country. I don't know the data on that. That's something that can be looked up pretty easily, I'm sure. I just don't have it off the top of my head. But you know, opening the aperture of of applicants, right? You want to be able to, or we want to help a housing provider open up their pool of applicants responsibly, right? And so that doesn't mean a hardline credit score threshold or any specific data point of financial behavior. We want to look at the individual as a whole, because that's going to give a much better picture of who they are and what they're going to be like as a renter. And that's what how we're trying to approach it. So not just looking at one data point, not creating hardline thresholds that need to be met, because in my opinion, when you're using just thresholds to decide to accept or decline someone, you're filtering out where we want to help you filter in, right? Open up the candidate pool of who could stay at your community, because, you know, it'd be a shame if you denied someone because of a low credit score, but everything else says they're going to be a really good renter, right? It stinks for you as an operator. It stinks for them as an applicant who obviously wanted to live at your community.
Yeah, and obviously housing is very important. There's a lot of talk about housing and the shortage of housing and all of these things. So absolutely, you want to find the right person and be able to say yes to the right person. Now, help me understand how that works, I guess, with this whole idea of being consistent and scaling and working with more residents, more applicants, because what you're saying is you have to kind of look at the whole picture without having all of these hard lines. But those hard lines are also the way that you make sure you're treating all applicants equal. So, like, how do you live in the middle there without kind of getting in that muddy water?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, that's something that those nuances can be talked about on their own episode in and of itself. Really what it is that every decision you make, you should be able to repeat it. I think that's a core principle. And that aligns really well, I think, to fair housing, right? Making sure that you're applying the same standards, whatever they may be, to every applicant that's applying. Because, and this is something I've termed as like invisible risk, where, and I talked about before, where, okay, one property, their occupancy is low, so maybe they're going to make an exception this time. And then another one's relying on Sue or Sally or Joe or whoever at the property because they've been doing it for so long. Like they're never wrong. They always make the right decision. And then you have a property who's looking at a very similar applicant, but applying the policy strictly. It's those situations where consistency breaks down. And as a housing provider, you need to make sure that you're always applying the policies that are set forward. And in many jurisdictions, if not all, I mean, you have to make sure that you put out your screening standards. Like, this is what we look at. Here's how we apply these standards against everyone that applies in our communities, right? That's the biggest guardrail that operators need to adhere to. Because, you know, when policy starts living in individuals' heads or tribal knowledge or like on a spreadsheet, but it's not followed consistently, that's where things start to break down and they compound. You know, I mentioned earlier, I don't think that we got worse at screening. I think I just think the industry got less forgiving when you don't follow your own standards, if that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense. And I really appreciate you kind of breaking that down. And you're absolutely right. We could talk for hours about the nuances and how you build a system to be consistent. But that idea that any decision you make should be repeatable, meaning if one person applies and you say yes because of these certain factors, if someone else applies with similar or the same factors, that's also a yes for that person. And that is where technology really can help you out. They can have all of those things. They can understand the nuance and understand that low credit score isn't an automatic no, that if there's low credit score, then XYZ have to be true, or vice versa. And to have that in somebody's brain is way too complex. You don't want to, because at some point people start making gut decisions.
Or what if someone's out sick and someone new is having to run the screening, right? That creates huge risk for an organization.
Yep. And you're right. We are less forgiving as an industry and as a culture when it comes to those things. I mean, there's plenty of stories out there. We don't have to dig into any of them about decisions that were made that were incorrect based on bad data or bad models. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? Because there are many people, I think historically, that probably were denied housing that probably should have gotten it.
Yeah.
And other people that should have been denied and they were given the opportunity to live in certain communities because the systems or processes just were not refined enough to make sure those guardrails really stood up strong.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think this leads to kind of the applicant experience or the customer experience where while kindness and softness and representing yourself well as a housing provider means a lot, so does consistency and clarity. Being denied housing will never feel good, but if an operator can explain why specifically, it's much less likely that that's going to escalate in any way, right? It's the problem where a housing provider gets all this information and they're making some ambiguous decision based off that. And when the applicant asks, why was I denied? And there's no clear answer, like that's where bad things get worse, essentially, right? So I really do think also just clarity and screening, defensibility helps with the applicant experience as a whole, especially in those, what I would hope are edge cases where someone's denied.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example of you should be able to explain yourself, right? Yeah. And that does relate to that really good experience for that applicant, especially one that maybe is renting for the first time. Maybe we have somebody that's young, first time out on their own. They're trying to understand how the world works, and they are just told no.
Yeah.
Well, what do you do with that? You can't do anything with that.
Yeah.
If you're like, well, no, because of these things, now they're smarter, they're wiser, they understand what they need to do to achieve housing that they're looking for, and they can go accomplish that. So I think it does help. And I think it helps make sure that our industry is viewed positively, right? That we're helping people understand their financial readiness for certain situations, and we can help guide them down the right path versus just telling them no.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we think about property managers and screening, kind of looking into the future, and you're the right person to ask this question to, I think, because of your role, right? So as a product person, in the past, sales, you got to sell what you have today, right? You can't sell the future state. Yeah. But in product, you are trying to understand the industry, understand the needs, understand what's available, all of the different requests that are coming in to help build something for the future. So if a property manager was to ask you, what should I be thinking about when it comes to screening in the near future, even long-term future, where's your head at? Like, what do you think about?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we think of the future of screening, one, I'll probably always have a hard line of it being defensible, but adaptable. And that can mean a lot of things. But when we think of how regulations have changed just in the last, few years, I don't see that slowing down, especially on like the state level, the state jurisdiction level, where states are coming in with more and more guidance on what information can be used, what can't. So, what I'm working on is trying to make sure that we have, bar none, the most compliant screening that's out there in the market, right? But still the flexibility so that whether you have a national portfolio or you're concentrating in one jurisdiction, right, you're able to make the right decisions for your applicants coming in for whatever jurisdictions you have to abide by. And a lot of that, not a lot of it, but some of it obviously it's specific to the housing provider to make those determinations. But we as a screening provider can help a lot with that and make it as easy as possible and take a little bit more of that lift from the housing provider. Obviously, again, a lot of it's going to have to be with them. The decision is going to be with them, but we can still help support that decision. And that's really what I'm focused on. Again, we can add as many data sources as possible, right? That doesn't necessarily make us any better. And that's not where my focus is on. It's on what aspects of our screening will help support an operator's decision. And again, we want to focus on, is this individual who they say they are, and can they reliably pay rent? Because in the end, that's what really matters, right? Let the housing provider focus on the things that they should, on building a community, on creating a great resident experience. Let us help you. Let us think about the screening part of it. Even though, yes, obviously it's a huge part of your organization, it should be part of your infrastructure. But let us partner to help build that for you, or at least build that aspect of the business that you can put into your operation.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the part about being adaptable, because screening has evolved, right? Mm-hmm. At one point, it was more about kind of the background, the credit score, things like that. Now we're looking at their income. Now we're looking at income well beyond the pay stub, right?
Yeah.
Looking at kind of their financial health is really what I should say. Verifying identity, right? Trying to prevent fraud. So the whole screening process has continued to evolve. So you really should be working with somebody that is adaptable, somebody that can help with those things. And again, going back to the whole data piece, using data to continually refine the way we do it, to be consistent, to be fair, to create that really great experience. So I think it's really interesting where things will go, because I think when it comes to screening and many other aspects of our industry, sometimes we think like, oh, we've already figured that out. Mm-hmm. And then something changes, right?
Yeah, the goalpost moves
quite often. And you would think with screening it wouldn't, right? Like, we've been doing this for decades. Like, this should be super easy at this point. But the goalpost does move, like you said, and regulations change. And then what technology and data we have access to continues to change as well.
Yeah, no, agreed. And, that's nothing is constant but change, or whatever the saying is, right? And again, I don't see change slowing down in any way, not in our housing industry, not in the technology that's being used, not in the regulations that we have to abide by. So being mindful of that, and that's something to consider as an operator or a housing provider of choosing your tech partners. You want to focus on a partner that has experience in this space, right? As opposed to some startup that some tech person saw an opening in the industry. It's like, oh, I'm going to build something, and they can quite literally vibe code it now. the technology's become a commoditized. So now we have to go back to the human element, the experience, right? And to toot my own horn, that's one of the reasons, Rent Butter and I got together is I've been doing this for a long time. A lot of our folks have. You've been doing this for a long time. Rent Manager's been doing this for a long time. And that matters. That really does stick out. So it's not just so much of the technology, it's the folks behind the technology, to make sure that they understand where we came from, because that will help us to understand where we should go, and maybe not predict, but have some clear sight into what those changes mean and where they're possible to go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that. And at the end of the day, we are a people business, right? We're helping people with housing. It's so important that we do it well. When it comes to screening, I agree. I don't see a future where the human isn't in the loop in that, right? A lot would have to change before we get to that stage. And I think we're many, many, many years, or possibly decades, I don't even know, away from that. So there has to be human involved. Again, this is a people business. And that kind of goes back to what you're saying, right? Yeah. You have to trust the person that you are relying on to provide any type of solution. And a lot of that trust is built over time, right? Proven experience.
Absolutely. And that is actually a key component, I think, of our industry as well. Like, we have so many lifers. Essentially, I consider myself one at this point. I don't see any reason not to. But just there really is a passion for the folks who are in this industry. We're providing homes. Like, that's such an intimate aspect of our lives. Every one of us understands the impact our jobs have in our day-to-day, right? So I've always loved our industry. I think it's great. The people I've met and known, even the ones, I think we've only met in person. This is probably our second time, maybe,
so,
right?
Yeah.
But we've had so many conversations. And it's just always great when you get to meet folks. And, that's why I love conferences. I love being on site. I love doing things like this in person. It's so much different. Our industry has always shown the strength of us as a community, as humans, right? I don't mean to be mean to any AI, right? But the human element still matters immensely.
It does matter. And many are actually saying it will matter even more in the future as technology and so forth improves. So, well, Johnny, as we kind of head towards the end of the episode, let's talk about Rent Butter specifically, sure. Right? Anything you want to share about Rent Butter, what your team is up to, what you're working on, anything that's exciting from the seat that you sit in?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been there a few months, and I've definitely hit the ground running and really enjoying it. It's an amazing organization, and I was super proud to join them, and working really hard to again make sure that we are the absolute best screening provider out there. What's really interesting is the willingness of the organization to take feedback from every source. Obviously, I'm having these conversations with our clients, our customers directly, and bringing that in and helping to build out our product. But we're really focused on, and I've mentioned this a few times, helping an operator understand, is this person who they say they are, and are they able to pay rent? Right, those core questions I think are super important and what we're really focused on. And we've done really well, and great feedback. I mean, one of the things before joining this organization was asking around, right? What do you think of Rent Butter? And nothing but positive feedback. So I was super happy to join. I'm gonna continue and drive that legacy for sure. And we're a major partner with Rent Manager. We love you guys as well, and super excited about that partnership and where that's going to take us as we both continue to grow and mature as this industry does with us as well.
Yeah, no, that's all exciting. And I agree. I mean, we do enjoy working with the Rent Butter team. We were just talking about the different ways that we engage with each other. And we saw some of your team last week, and it was a lot of fun to spend some time with them. Great people, really focus on doing the right people and helping our industry. And that's really, like I said, that's what it's all about. So for our audience who wants to learn more about Rent Butter, learn more about maybe you, follow along with what you're up to, what are the best ways for them to connect, reach out, learn more? Yeah,
so actually, rentbutter.com, we just released a brand new website very recently at the time of us recording this. So check that out. Being able to talk everything about what we're doing, how we're trying to approach it, and obviously being able to get in contact with anyone who has additional questions. For me personally, LinkedIn's the best place to go. I try to be pretty prolific on LinkedIn. I've been using it since it first came out, so that is bar none the best way to get in contact with me. So those excited to be here. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, likewise, and I'm sure we'll see at some events and trade shows coming up. So we'll definitely drop some links into the show notes so we can get to those pretty easily. But rentbutter.com is pretty easy, and Johnny Bravo is pretty easy to find on LinkedIn as well. So
it is.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time. I really, really love this conversation. I think it is important. Screening is not just something that we keep doing the same way, right? It is evolving. It is changing. It's getting better.
It is. I agree. And nothing but good things. I think as a industry, the screening aspect, we have good head on our shoulders in general. So I think we'll drive this in the best way possible for operators using us and for the applicants that are using us.
100%. Well, thanks again for your time. And thank you to our audience for joining us for another episode. And until next time, keep going beyond rent.
Thanks for listening to Beyond Rent. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a colleague and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the next one. Beyond Rent is brought to you by Rent Manager Property Management Software. Learn more at rentmanager.com. Until next time, keep going beyond rent.